G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here with a topographic map view of the Glen Innes Airport. Now that runway that runs northwest southeast, that's about 5,800 feet sealed runway. The roughly east-west runway, it's longer, probably about 7,000 feet, but it's unsealed. The airport is northwest of town, and I am northeast of town, and I'm actually under the approach paths for two of the runways and one of the departure paths. So it's a good thing that I like looking at aeroplanes in the sky, because for about the past half a year there's been plans mooted for a 600 student aeronautical training facility to be developed at the local airport. And it's a long time since I've been doing much flying myself, but I do still have some opinions and some recollections of what it was like and what the economics of flying aeroplanes for a living is like in Australia. Once upon a time, I used to make a living selling helicopter joyride tickets, so I know a little bit about the field. I know, for example, that today it takes 25 hours to get an ultralight pilot certificate. 45 hours is a restricted private pilot's licence under the General Aviation Scheme. 55 hours is an unrestricted private pilot's licence, and 110 hours is a commercial pilot's licence from the Civil Aviation Safety Authority in Australia. I also know that if one holds a Recreational Aviation Australia licence to fly recreational aircraft like this, which is your 25-hour licence, that 25 hours will be deducted from how long it will take to get a private pilot's licence or a commercial licence. So, we have a newspaper article from the Glen Innes Examiner, 14th of March, so it's not totally breaking news, and it reads, "The skies are opening for local would-be pilots with the Australian Wings Academy, AWA, operated by Glen Innes Airport developer Australian Asia Flight Training, AAFT, receiving government approval to offer vet fee help loans." That's written with caps lock. "To eligible students enrolled in its AVI 50408 Diploma of Aviation course. AAFT's plans to construct a 600 student academy at Glen Innes are progressing after receiving development application approval in December 2012. Glen Innes flight instructor James Gresham already offers recreational pilot certification with students then able to progress to a CASA, that's Civil Aviation Safety Authority, private pilot licence with the academy once it starts operating in Glen Innes later this year. But in the interim, at AWA's Coolangatta campus, the Diploma of Aviation is then the next step towards a career in aviation, earning graduates a commercial pilot's licence with multi-engine, multi-crew and instrument ratings. Vet fee help, bracket, not HEX help, as reported in the February 19 Examiner, close bracket, allows eligible Australian students to have all or part of their diploma tuition fees paid for them by the Australian government in the form of a loan. This approval gives AWA an ability to train all aspiring Australian commercial pilots to the highest international standards, initially at the long-established facility on the Gold Coast before the expansion at Glen Innes opens, the Academy's Managing Director Phil Sweeney said. Eligible students can borrow funds over their lifetime to the fee help limit, currently $93,204. It currently costs $74,495 for those holding a private pilot's licence to complete the diploma. Accommodation and living expenses are not covered by vet fee help. So, you can learn to fly on a recreational aircraft, get a recreational licence, all on government money, as long as you go on to get a commercial licence, also on government money, and then you get to pay it back. The loan is repaid in instalments through the tax system once the student's income is above the minimum repayment threshold, currently $49,095 a year. Mr Sweeney said that as the Academy is an independent vet fee help provider, the full loan amount of $93,204 can be contributed towards commercial flying training tuition. Students won't have to use part of the funding to pay for the university degree portion of their training. Should they opt to receive credits towards a bachelor degree, such as a Bachelor of Administration, they can use the Diploma of Aviation to reduce the time the degree takes to complete, and this could be undertaken by distance learning while they are flying and receiving wages. The diploma course is of 40 weeks duration and is run frequently at the Coolangatta campus. Mr Sweeney expects to roll out in Glen Innes when the local facility becomes operational. First step, however, is the recreational pilot certificate, which Mr Gresham calls stick and rudder skills. Those as young as 15 years can start their instruction and gain their certification much more economically with Mr Gresham than under a CASA accredited scheme. That's because a CASA accredited scheme would mean using general aviation aircraft, which are about 40 to 60% more expensive per hour to maintain, operate, fly and insure than a recreational aircraft. They just then need to study the CASA subjects and undergo a check flight with a CASA approved examiner to convert to the CASA private pilot's licence, if they have the hours up. Continuing on to the next page. I teach the basic flying skills, and those stick skills are essential. Mr Gresham, while holding substantial US commercial jet engine pilot qualifications, found the stringent requirements for translating those qualifications to allow him to train commercial pilots in his new homeland Australia were daunting. He said that working in the bush as a one-man band doing general aviation instruction was not really feasible. Well, it never has been, not in the history of Australia and not in the history of aeroplanes. But this may change with the arrival of a flight school. So he's hoping to train locals to fly his recreational aircraft and then feed them into the AWA borrow money from the government commercial pilot training scheme. I've been able to do recreational instruction and it has been great, Mr Gresham said. It's simple, basic, fun flying, but it's also a perfect way to start a career, and we can do that right here in Glen Innes. Mr Sweeney is also keen to kickstart some local flying careers. To be able to offer Australia's young aspiring pilots a way of training to be a commercial pilot with financial assistance ticks all the boxes from us. From the day the project started, we always wanted to see a sizable part of the enrolment being young Australians from all family circumstances. Pilots from Australia's rural areas have always been overrepresented in the Australian commercial pilot workforce. Now we see a way of this continuing. With training facilities at the back door, it is possible that the workforce may also include a strong representation of Glen Innes born and bred in the future. So, that's the plan. Well, forgive me for casting a roomy ancient eye over this marvellous magic pudding in the sky. But it seems to me there's a couple of things that they haven't mentioned in that newspaper article. Part 1, freshly minted commercial pilots with 110 hours find it extraordinarily difficult to become employed. This is because there's a surcharge imposed by the insurance company on the amount of damages which the aircraft owner must pay in the event of any incident or accident. And the surcharge varies with the amount of operating experience accrued by the pilot before they crash. So, if you've got less than 500 hours and you crash the plane's owner gets to pay 30% of the damages. If you've got over 500 hours, it's 20%. If you've got over 1,000 hours, it's 10%. So the insurance companies tend to herd the airlines into employing people who've got at least 500 hours and preferably 1,000 hours. The only way to get from having a freshly minted commercial licence to actually having enough hours that you can get a job is to have been employed as a cadet by some expanding airline, or to have been employed as a cadet by some expanding air force and have a guaranteed greasy sled ride through the starvation years. Otherwise, you're looking at renting an aircraft and flying joyrides if you can find a location where there's a runway close enough to a population stream where people will come and fly your joyrides. Or perhaps you can tow gliders and fly for nothing for the opportunity to fly somebody else's aeroplane on somebody else's fuel, pulling gliders into the sky. Or you can lift parachutists up into the sky and let them jump out of an aeroplane that they've paid for, and you'll fly for them for nothing. Or, as is fairly common, young commercial pilots on the make who've just got their commercial licence then get an instructor's rating, which kicks in at about 150 hours, and then they get more hopeful yokels to pay them to sit in the right-hand seat and build up the hours as an instructor. So it becomes a kind of a Ponzi scheme where you hope the never-ending flow of new people is going to pay you enough money to get your hours up so you can get out of the feeding frenzy of the bottom rung on the ladder. So would I ever advise anybody to borrow $94,000 from the government so that they can start flying overfat, overfed, overweight ultralights and then work their way up into general aviation and then get themselves a commercial licence and then get themselves a dream job in the airlines? I'd have to say that with anthropogenic global warming and peak oil and the global financial crisis and the fact that airlines are a contracting industry because there's less and less people who can afford to buy a ton of kerosene and fly to the other side of the world for a holiday once a year, I would not advise anybody to go into debt to become a commercial pilot. Just point of view of somebody who's been an aeroplane freak for 50 of my 52 years. And I don't know whether I'm ever going to see a fleet of training aeroplanes over the top of my place with 600 students employed or employing instructors just down the road. I really think it's a magic pudding in the sky scheme, and they tend not to happen in reality. But I could be wrong. If I am wrong, it'll be an aeroplane spotter's dream. I'll be sitting under constantly droning, moving aerofoils, listening endlessly for the sound of engines failing. And, you know, statistically, it's got to happen. Back in the days when the Royal Australian Air Force used to fly F-111s around here, they crashed one of them every 7 years for about 28 years. Maybe it was only 21 years. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.